Hey everybody, welcome to the NFL Fantasy Flex Podcast. I'm your guy, Big Mike, and this episode is the Week 13 preview. So we're going to go through all the predictions of who we think is going to boom, who we think is going to bust, and just predict how each game is going to go. So if you need some help setting your lineup or figuring out who you should start and who you should sit, this is the podcast for you. So let's get started here with tonight's game, Dallas at New Orleans. Now, Thursday night games, as I always say, are hard to predict. I typically try to stay away from these games if at all possible. I mean, if you have some studs in this game that you can't avoid, like Dak Prescott being your QB1 or something like that, then by all means, you're going to have to fire them up. But if at all possible, any kind of fringe players or flex players, sometimes it's just better to err on the side of caution and not start them if they're playing on Thursday night. At least this is my methodology. But what can we expect out of this game? It's a bit of a wild card. Besides the fact that it's on Thursday, Dallas head coach Mike McCarthy has been away from the team all week with COVID, as well as several other players and staff members. So again, this brings a little bit of a lack of stability to the situation here. We have their defensive coach Dan Quinn, who's has head coaching experience, filling in. So, hopefully it's not too much of an issue. But again, just Thursday night game, weird coaching situation. People out with the one-niner. You don't know what's gonna play out here. But I think the big question is, going into this game, what are these defenses doing? Which defense is going to show up? We saw Dallas a couple weeks ago show out a really good defensive performance. In the past 2 weeks, maybe it had been a bit more average. And then same thing with New Orleans. A couple weeks ago, they've looked, in past weeks, they've looked unstoppable. But then last week on Thanksgiving, they just got annihilated by the Bills and shredded up. So what are we going to see out of these defenses? A bit of an unknown, but I think that's going to be the key to the game, which defense shows up. So if you're looking for major points on the Dallas side, you have to start Dak Prescott here. No question. I think I have him as my QB1 still, even on a Thursday night short week. You can't really do that much better than Prescott at the quarterback position for fantasy football, of course. When it comes to the running back situation for Dallas, we know Ezekiel Elliott's a little banged up, but he's good to go. Expect to see a bit more Tony Pollard perhaps, and a bit more of that committee timeshare. And of course, Pollard has a little bit more of a boost in PPR formats because of his use in the passing game. Receivers for Dallas, I love CeeDee Lamb this week. He's back from, I think he was out last week with a concussion, but he's fully back now, practiced all week. Michael Gallup was a guy who had a nice showing on Thanksgiving when their two starting receivers are out. I like him again in this matchup. And then Amari Cooper, who was out with the one-niner for the past couple weeks. He is apparently playing tonight. He was reportedly back in the facility, but had a cough, so he had some symptoms still. I don't know how that works, but he's playing. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to have. He's one of those guys where if you have him and you drafted him and have been playing him as like your receiver, wide receiver 2, perhaps, I think this is one of those games where you just sit him. Thursday night, weird coaching situation, him coming back on limited practice, might be better just to sit Amari this week. At least take it as a learning opportunity to see, hey, is he fully back and can I start him next week with confidence? And then, of course, the tight end for Dallas, Dalton Schultz, is proved to be a really hot tight end commodity, and I expect him to be top 10 easily this week as well. And again, just supports my thesis of not taking tight ends early. You could pick up a guy like Schultz off the waiver wire consistently season after season, and not have to waste an expensive draft pick on a tight end. And on the New Orleans side, there's probably not many guys you're starting here. The quarterback situation's a bit murky. You have Taysom Hill back in the fold here alongside Trevor Siemian. We don't know how the snap share is going to pan out here likely both are going to be mixed in, so therefore neither are a real fantasy option for you. And then at the running back spot, this is probably the only position for New Orleans that you're potentially going to have any starters. Alvin Kamara's back, as well as Mark Ingram. Again, we'll see what the committee looks like there, but they seem to have taken their time with Kamara, and we'll see. He should be fully back. So I'd say fire him up with confidence. He's probably the only guy really worth firing up on that New Orleans side of the ball. So yeah, then moving into Sunday's games, we have the Giants at Miami. I think this is going to be a closer game than people think. That Giants offense looked a bit better. Definitely addition from the subtraction of Jason Garrett there. Had some more innovative plays. Looked like the offense took a step forward into the modern day future with Freddie Kitchens calling the shots there. And what also was surprising is that Giants defense looked phenomenal last week. I don't know if they were just fired up to play division rival Philadelphia, or if they were fired up because it was Michael Strahan Day, but hopefully this is a sign of a trend where the Giants are getting a bit better on both sides of the ball. And then we look at Miami, who've I think they've gone 4-0 in their past 4 games, something like that. And this team is on fire. So vast improvements on both sides of the ball in Miami as well. So we have 2 kind of up and coming improving teams. Miami definitely the greater of the 2 here. So I think they're going to win, but I don't think it's going to be this big blowout that people might expect. So look for a grinded out back and forth game where both teams are forced to try to move the ball through the air and on the ground. I don't see one team getting so far ahead that the other has to abandon game script and go full on pass heavy. Daniel Jones on the Giants side, probably not worth a start this week. He's also battling a neck injury, but he is going to play. The only Giant really you probably want to start is Saquon Barkley here. He seems to be improving week by week, getting more and more touches week by week. So I like him in this game. Some other guys on the Giants worth mentioning: Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay. Expect them both to see more touches, especially under this new offensive regime. And then Evan Ingram has also been in the fold here, and I've actually read a lot about him being a potential sleeper this week. So if you're really, really, really in a pinch at tight end, give Evan Ingram a look. And then on the Miami side of the ball, Tua is probably a low-end quarterback starter this week. I mean, I think I have him towards the bottom of my top 20. He's been playing much better. I don't know if he might just barely get you that 20 points you're looking for out of your quarterback this week. We have Myles Gaskin. He's towards the bottom of my top 20 running backs as well. Jalen Waddle, who's been on fire recently. I expect him to do well, but not as well as he has been. He's probably going to be locked up by James Bradbury, and probably doubled with a safety over top. While he's thrived and is clearly has a case for best receiver of this draft, I'd say it's neck and neck with him and Jamar Chase at this point. So Jalen Waddle leapfrogging guys like Kadarius Toney and Devontae Smith, I'd say, as the clear second best receiver in this draft class. Has been really playing well. So he's going to put up numbers for you, but I don't think quite as well as he's been in the past couple weeks. And then Mike Gesicki, I think, is a startable tight end this week if you don't have any better options. He's kind of in the top 2/3 of my top 20, I believe. All right, so moving on to Indianapolis at Houston. I think at first glance, people are going to expect, we have these red hot Colts are just going to stampede the lowly Houston team here. I think this is going to be a closer game than people think. I think the Colts still win. But you'll see there's a theme of this week, which is some really tough division matchups. It's you'll see there in the next upcoming games here. There's just some really great divisional matchups where the underdogs are at home, and so those are kind of prime trap games, if you will. Not that I think Houston upsets the Colts, but I think again it's closer. It's not going to be this massive blowout that people might think at first glance. So Carson Wentz, I think, continues doing well. Again, in this game manager role, he'll probably give you your 20 points you're looking for out of a quarterback. I think it's more going to be a Jonathan Taylor day where, again, this is the Colts offense. They gear up, load up behind that fantastic offensive line and run it with Taylor. And it puts the pressure on Houston to score and force the Colts to move the ball through the air. And I don't think that happens. I think, the Colts get a lead, but have to battle. The Texans are not going to just go away. I think they're going to stay in the mix and kind of force the Colts to close this one out. But I think they could largely ride their running game here. I think Michael Pittman has a solid day. Any points, any yards that the Colts need to go and pick up through the air, Pittman should feast against this Houston secondary. And then Jack Doyle we saw get in the fold at tight end last week. So he might be another sneaky tight end start who could find the end zone for you this week. Only if you're in a desperate pinch. And then on the Houston side, I think the only two guys worth mentioning are Tyrod Taylor. Again, Houston probably playing from behind this game, might feel a bit more pressure to throw the ball. And then Brandon Cooks, he sees an immense target share. He's he's actually a really not touchdown dependent fantasy player. So he's going to get yards, whether get points and yards and catches and put up production for you despite him finding the end zone or not. So expect Cooks. I think he's going to be just outside. He's just outside my top 20 receivers, but you could do worse than Brandon Cooks. Next is Minnesota at Detroit. So again, tough divisional matchup where the underdog is at home. And I think this game, I would love to, if you guys have been listening, I root hard for the Lions. I really think they just play too hard to be have 0 wins. And so I'm rooting for them hard to get their first win. It would be amazing to get it at home. Again, after a heartbreaking loss on Thanksgiving against a division rival in Minnesota. I would love for this to be a trap game, but I think this is all going to depend on the Lions offense. I think, do they put up points enough to force Minnesota to have to throw the ball? I think that's what it's going to come down to. Otherwise, Minnesota's just going to load up and hand the ball off and again, hey Detroit, can you beat us by scoring more than 20 points on us, right? We could go drive the ball downfield, take long drives, kick field goals if necessary, right? But are you going to turn around and get the ball, Detroit, and actually put up points and force us to press and open up our playbook and potentially make some mistakes? And so I think that's what's going to make or break this game. Lions defense isn't as bad as they are on paper and as much as their statistics show. It's all because their offense doesn't put up any points, gives the ball right back to the other team, puts way too much pressure on that defense. But they play hard. And so anyway, I think you fire up all your Vikings this week. Kirk Cousins, Alexander Mattison, filling in for the injured Dalvin Cook is probably out 2 to 3 weeks. I would say probably more 3. They don't have much of a reason to usher him back earlier than he needs to. Again, because Madison is such a great backup for him. And then Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, fire them up. And I think Tyler Conklin, a contrarian play here. I think he's very touchdown dependent, and I think he hasn't scored in a couple weeks now, so I think he might be due for another sneaky end zone visit. And then on the Detroit side, we have a quarterback, Jared Goff, not top 20. I think you could do better, but if Minnesota does get a lead early, they might be forced to push the ball through the air. At running back, we have Jamal Williams filling in for the injured DeAndre Swift, who's probably out at least 2 weeks with a shoulder injury. Again, they have no reason to rush back their star young running back Swift on a lost season. So hopefully he's back for the fantasy playoffs, DeAndre Swift. But Jamal Williams is a great short-term fill-in. I believe he's top 2 or 3 guy on my waiver ads list this week. So fire him up. And then TJ Hawkinson at tight end is probably the only other guy on Detroit that you'd think about starting, who I think is a solid start. Again, Detroit likely playing from behind will need to move the ball through the air, and hopefully they do so with some success, because that's the only way they're going to have a chance to pick up their first win this week. All right, next game, Philadelphia at the Jets. I think Philly's obviously favored in this one, so expect another run-heavy game script for Philly. If you look at their numbers, they've really been leaning on their run game of late, and it's been working. Jalen Hurts is a little banged up, tweaked his ankle at the end of last week's game, but reportedly is playing. So I think we could see him potentially limited on designed runs. I could see the Eagles leaning on their run game even a little bit more than typical because of this. I still think Hurts is a solid start, depending on your quarterback situation. At running back, Miles Sanders reportedly tweaked his recently injured and healed knee at the end of last game. He was held out, I think, for part of the fourth quarter. He's reportedly playing this week, but I expect to see a healthy dose of Boston Scott. Again, I think this game script is so run heavy for Philly that both of these running backs could potentially eat. However, I do like Boston Scott a little bit better. I think he has more of a chance to find the end zone and is utilized a little bit more in the passing game, where Miles Sanders is, who they've been using better, but is a bit more of that big play guy. So if he is limited anyway by that knee and isn't as explosive and able to break the big play, then I think he might have a bit of an underwhelming day. At receiver for Philly, Devontae Smith, very boomer bust, a bit inconsistent. It's his rookie year, but otherwise he looks pretty good. I think he's a starter this week. I think you put him in your lineup. And then Dallas Goedert, I think you fire him up as well this week. Has a really good chance to find the end zone. I think the Jets are pretty poor against opposing tight ends. So I like Goddard in this week. And then for the Jets, I think the only Jet you're considering starting is Elijah Moore. I think in PPR, he's a guy you want to fire up. Jets are probably playing from behind, but with Zach Wilson at the helm, you could expect a real inefficient pass game. And then the Jets have a pretty ugly committee at running back: Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman. There was another guy, I forget his name, who found the end zone last week. Just stay away from the Jets running backs. It's really just Elijah Moore that you might want to start in terms of Jets players. Arizona at Chicago. I think the Chicago defense plays a little bit better than expected. I think we see a little bit of rust on Kyler to start the game. And so I think this game is closer than people expect for at least the first half. And then I think you see Arizona pull away towards the end. So I think a guy like David Montgomery is an interesting contrarian play here. I mean, you look at some of the statistics around that Arizona defense. It's a great defense, but their weakness is against the run. So if Chicago is able to come out and at least play half the game, a really good defense for half the game, and lean on that running game and keep things close for as long as they can, Montgomery should eat. But then, of course, I see Arizona pulling away at the end, at least in the second half. So maybe not a huge blowout like people think, but obviously a solid chance for Arizona to win. Then I think the other thing to think about is what X factor wide receiver for Arizona is gonna emerge from this game. We have DeAndre Hopkins back, but is it going to be Kirk or Rondale Moore or AJ Green that plays that supporting cast role, who is a potential streamer for you this week? So things to think about. And then, so just going through the players here, Arizona, Kyler Murray, back from injury, going to fire him up. Of course, you drafted him as your clear quarterback one, probably couldn't wait to get him back on the field. So you're going to start him with confidence. James Conner at the running back spot for Arizona. You're going to start him. He's the lead back, the workhorse there now. Has a great nose for the end zone. So definitely fire him up. DeAndre Hopkins, love him this week. Coming back from injury, should be well rested. Again, maybe he has to shake off a little rust early, but I think that connection with Murray is gonna emerge, no problem. And then you have, like I mentioned, these other receivers, Kirk, Moore, or Green. I think your guess is as good as mine. I think Moore in keeper leagues, Rondale Moore is a really solid target and stash. But your guess is good as mine. I would probably lean more towards Kirk or Moore in this game. I could actually see DeAndre Hopkins catching a lot of attention, and perhaps Rondale Moore sneaking behind that defense and getting behind the safeties and having a big play. And then at tight end, Zach Ertz, he's coming off of like a 3-touchdown week. Was used heavily in their very conservative Colt McCoy offense. I still think he sees some work and is a solid start at tight end, especially for a guy that you might have been able to get either late in a draft or off the waiver wire for cheap. So Zach Ertz is worth a look as well. On the Chicago side of the ball, looks like we're going to have Andy Dalton at quarterback again. Fields is back at practice, but taking second team reps, so maybe he'll return next week. But for now, we got the Red Rocket, not worth a start. Don't even think about it. Like I said, David Montgomery is an interesting play here. He's been back from injury a couple weeks, hasn't found the end zone yet, so perhaps he's due. I think he should see a little bit more volume and a little bit more production than he did last week. Again, a bit of a contrarian play, but I think if you have him and you don't have any other options, maybe at flex or at running back 2, you could plug him in there with a bit of confidence this week. You have Darnell Mooney at wide receiver for Chicago, probably the only receiver you're thinking about. You look at Andy Dalton, he's not going to be able to push the ball downfield, so they're just able to hit a bunch of underneath stuff to Darnell Mooney, kind of similar to how the Steelers used Deontay Johnson, to be quite honest. And so especially in PPR formats, Darnell Mooney is probably great, probably a guy you got later in a draft. So, and again, a sleeper I called out way before the draft. And then Cole Kmet at tight end for Chicago. If you're a little bit tight in this position, Cole Kmet's seen a nice target share. I think he's had 6 targets in the past 2-3 weeks. So you could do worse than Cole Kmet at tight end, a guy worth thinking about. All right, now we're moving on to the Chargers at Bengals. So this has shootout potential. We'll see how these defenses, we don't know if they ever show up or not. And the offenses are very pass happy and spread them out, 2 gunslinger type quarterbacks. So I actually think this is going to be a really fun, entertaining game with fantasy points all over. For the Chargers, we have Justin Herbert, obviously going to start. Austin Eckler, obviously going to start. Keenan Allen, obviously going to start. If you have Mike Williams, you might want to think about it. Depends on what options you have. He's very boom or bust. But I think if this game, you have to make your choice, right? I would bet that this is going to be a high-scoring shootout type of game. So in that case, Mike Williams is probably going to see some work and probably break a big play or two. And then you have Jared Cook, kind of a middling tight end here, very touchdown dependent. So again, if you think it's going to be high-scoring, his chances of scoring a touchdown go up. So you might want to fire him up as well. And then on the Cincinnati side, Joe Burrow, maybe a bit more of a guy you drafted with the intent of having another quarterback on your roster. And trying to play matchups. So I like this matchup. Depends on who else you might have. Joe Mixon is going to be an obvious start for you at running back. Jamar Chase, an obvious start for you at wide receiver. And then we have a guy like T. Higgins, who has been very boom or bust, very touchdown dependent. So again, if you think this is going to be a high scoring game like I do, you might want to give T. Higgins a look as well. All right, next game, Tampa Bay at Atlanta. Again, another one of these divisional matchups where the underdog's at home. But I don't think there's a chance for an upset here. I think this is an easy win for Tampa. I think Atlanta, if you guys have been listening to me, is a team I think is just really, really bad. So I think Tampa goes up early and grinds this one out. So Tom Brady, obvious start. Leonard Fournette, Mike Williams, Chris Godwin, I think struggled a little bit last week. I think he gets back to normalcy. And then we have Antonio Brown, who might be back this week. I think he's still squarely in the middle of questionable, so keep an eye out for his updates as well. I think if he comes back, you could expect him to eat into both Evans and Godwin's work a little bit. And then Rob Gronkowski, he's fully healthy and surprisingly not touchdown dependent when he plays. He's used in other aspects of the passing game, gets some big plays, has that chemistry with Brady, so fire Rob up as a top 5 tight end for you this week. And then on the Atlanta side, Matt Ryan, I think there should be better quarterback options available for you, but I think he might barely get into the top 20 this week. Cordell Patterson, obviously he's probably the only must start on Atlanta. And then Kyle Pitts, I could see him being utilized a bit heavily here. Again, if Tampa Bay goes up early, Atlanta's forced to have a pass first game script. And so I could see a guy like Pitts being a potential volume play this week, but the matchup's not very good for him. That Tampa Bay defense is pretty darn good. So anyway, next is Jacksonville at the LA Rams. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game than people think. That Jacksonville pass defense in particular isn't terrible. It's actually, I would say, average. And we've seen really heavy pass volume from the Rams recently. We've seen Matt Stafford struggle a bit with turnovers and accuracy problems. So I think this might be a week where the Rams say, all right, let's take a step back, right? Force the Jacksonville offense to beat us, run the ball a lot, play conservative, and just get out of this as easily as we can with a win. Let's get Matt Stafford back on track and just kind of pump the brakes, cool the jets a little bit on passing the ball like 50 times a game. So perfect time for the Rams to reestablish that run game, which was a little bit more of their DNA, at least going into this season. They were always a pass first, pass happy team, but they were at least balanced enough to keep teams honest by utilizing the run. And I think this is the week they get back to that. So Matt Stafford, you're going to fire him up. He's ranked maybe a little lower than he has been the past few weeks. And what's interesting with him is despite his struggles, he's put up solid fantasy points. Well, at least he did last week. I think the 2 games before that were under 20-point performances. But, last week he struggled. He still gave me about 29 points. So I think this week you maybe see the turnovers limited, a bit more of a conservative approach, but I still like Stafford to give you 20-plus points this week. At the running back spot, we have Darrell Henderson with a strained quad. He hasn't practiced this week, but he is expected to play. Again, in a run-heavy game script, I would also expect to see a nice dose of Sony Michel. So if you're in a pinch at running back, hopefully you're able to get Michel for free off waivers, and for flex or running back 2, depending on your situation, you might be able to plug Michel in and get some production from him. Obviously, you're going to start Cooper Kupp at receiver. The other 2 receivers for the Rams worth mentioning, Odell Beckham and Van Jefferson. These guys were used nicely last week, appropriately, in ways that leverage their strengths, which I think 2 weeks ago when we saw Van Jefferson struggle, he wasn't being utilized to his strengths. He was just kind of swapped out for Woods, who went down in practice, and they're not the same type of player. They can't be used the same way. But last week we saw Van Jefferson get back to being utilized as more of the big play vertical threat. And then Odell Beckham Jr. as well. They did a great job kind of finding him spots to get the ball in space in kind of mid routes, and so and allowing him to leverage that elite route running to get some separation. And, he's not going to be your speedster anymore, and he's not going to be your yard after catch guy. So you have to really be very particular in the way you're going to utilize Odell, and they did a great job of that. So again, I think Odell and Van are a bit limited this week just because of game script. I think their production's really going to be tied to volume, if anything. So I don't recommend starting either of those guys this week, but both could be solid bench stashes for you. Definitely worth rostering. And then at tight end, Tyler Higbee. He's a bit touchdown dependent. They don't use him a ton in the red zone either, so I think you could do better at tight end. To be quite honest, I'd rather take a chance elsewhere. I'd rather, he's got a decent floor, but he's got really no ceiling or a very short ceiling. So I'd rather go to a guy where it is a bit more boom or bust at tight end if I'm in that big of a pinch where I'm considering Higbee. And then on the Jacksonville side, only guys worth mentioning are James Robinson. You're going to start him. Probably drafted him as a running back 2 or 3. So chances are you're going to need to fire him up. And then we have James O'Shaughnessy filling in for the injured Dan Arnold. I think he's a sneaky tight end add, and probably would rather take a chance on him than going after boring Tyler Higbee. So James O'Shaughnessy, if you're in a real pinch, I think he gets plugged in for Dan Arnold's spot and sees Dan Arnold like volume. He found the end zone last week, and I think he's going to be utilized again. So you heard it here first. All right, next game, Washington at Las Vegas. So let's see if I could actually call these two teams by the correct name. It's not the Redskins and it's not Oakland. It's the football team and Las Vegas. I think this game has potential shootout implications as well. Washington defense has been playing a bit better lately, but we're going to see how sustainable that is, especially with some of the key injuries they have on that side of the ball. I think Las Vegas has a great pass rush, and they're going to pressure Heineke. But I think it all comes down to each team trying to keep up with the other. So Heineke, I think, is an okay start for you this week. Again, if you're in a real quarterback pinch and you're willing to take a bit of a risk. At running back, you have Antonio Gibson, who is going to see a bump in value and volume with J.D. McKissick likely out with a concussion. We saw him leave the game, be carted off at the end of last week's game, and hasn't practiced so far. So he's looking like he's on the wrong side of questionable. J.D. McKissick is. And so it looks like Antonio Gibson could finally move into that workhorse role where we don't have to worry about pesky McKissick. We have Terry McLaurin, nice start at wide receiver, and Logan Thomas, who made his debut back from injured reserve last week, almost caught a touchdown. But it's good to at least see him being targeted and being back to being that key red zone target for Washington. So I like him this week as well. On the Las Vegas side, we have Derek Carr. I think he's worth starting. We have Josh Jacobs, seemingly healthy and squared away at that running back 1 spot. At receiver, Hunter Renfrow, particularly in PPR formats, should do well for you. And then at tight end, a guy worth mentioning is Foster Moreau. He's filling in for the injured Darren Waller. Don't expect Darren Waller-like production. There is a talent gap, but because of the way Las Vegas's offense is structured, I still think the tight end is going to see volume and get production regardless of who's the next man up. So again, if you're in a pinch, want to roll the dice a little bit, Foster Moreau could be your guy. All right, next game, Baltimore at Pittsburgh, again, another rivalry game where the underdog's at home. And this is one rivalry where you just know it's going to be a great football game. There's going to be some hard hits. There's going to be a lot of intensity, and I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth scoring. So a lot of points for both teams. Game scripts that are going to have to stay balanced for both teams. And I think there's a bit of a correction for both the Baltimore defense, who's been playing really, really well since their bye. I think this is a bit of a correction where they go back to maybe being not underperforming, but a bit back to down to earth, where maybe they've played great and they're going to fade back to just above average this week. And I think we're going to see the Pittsburgh offense, where they've been playing pretty poorly. I think they might get back up to being average or slightly below average. So I could see some corrections happening for both of these aspects of each team that has been seeing either a bump or a decline recently. They kind of get back to equilibrium, I believe, this week. So on Baltimore's side, Lamar Jackson's going to be an elite start. The running back situation in Baltimore, Devontae Freeman's been a surprising kind of revelation there. If you're able to pick him up and start him, you've gotten some solid production. But Latavius Murray is back from his injury, and I think is going to be heavily in the mix. So this is a murky, ugly committee that I don't want any part of. And then at wide receiver, Marquise Brown is the only guy for Baltimore really worth paying any attention to for fantasy. I think he has a great week. Been a little quiet recently, so I think he breaks out a bit here and gets back to his big play self. And then Mark Andrews at tight end, obviously one of Jackson's favorite targets down the middle of the field, and so he's going to eat here as well. And then on Pittsburgh side, we have Big Ben. I think he's barely outside the top 20, probably could find other quarterbacks. Najee Harris had a bit of a step back last week, took a big hit, and just games got kind of written out of the game script last week. I think he's back to being a solid running back one for you. Deontay Johnson is gonna shine again. He's just a PPR beast. He's gonna just continue to get catch after catch after catch. And then Pat Freiermuth, he might miss this game with a concussion. He's in protocol. I didn't check his practice status for today, but a situation worth keeping an eye on. I think if he does play, he is worth considering a start for. So keep an eye on Pat F there if you like him at tight end. All right, next game is San Francisco at Seattle. Again, another great rivalry game where the underdog's at home. And, this is kind of a tale of two franchises here. The 49ers, who kind of had some injuries early, are finally righting the ship and really performing well, are on the upswing. And then you have Seattle, who is on the downswing and has really struggled over the past few weeks. Russell Wilson injured, offensive line playing horribly, defense playing poorly. So I think there's a slight correction here as well, where the 49ers maybe, start to plateau a little bit in terms of their upswing, and Seattle, perhaps they hit rock bottom last week and are starting to see a little bit of light, after the darkest of night. And so, so expect a slight correction here for both of these teams, but 49ers should still take care of business. Jimmy G, I think, is a decent start for you this week. Elijah Mitchell must start. Brandon Ayuk, with Deebo Samuel out nursing a groin injury, I think we'll see Ayuk get a nice bump. And I think the biggest beneficiary of Deebo's injury is actually going to be George Kittle. I think he's going to go back to being more of a focal point of this offense, where he gets a short routes in space and is able to make things happen after the catch. So I like him this week. And then on the Seattle side of the ball, I don't even know if Russell Wilson's a must start anymore. I think if you have some other quarterbacks like a Joe Burrow maybe that you might want to consider starting over Wilson. Tyler Lockett has shown to be the better receiving option in this offense. DK Metcalf almost goosed on us last week. Not that I have any stock in him, but I think his lack of route running ability is really hurting him. He's more of a just let him run straight and bomb it to him kind of receiver. And I don't think Wilson has the time to let those deeper routes develop with his poor offensive line. So I think DK is going to be just kind of limited and hamstrung a little bit in this offense, even though he's an elite talent. And then Gerald Everett at tight end has actually been getting a lot of nice volume. We saw him with some nice yards after catch last week. So he could be a nice little sleeper tight end for you if you're in a pinch. All right, Sunday night game, Denver at Kansas City. Well, this is a nice divisional matchup, but the favorites are at home. I think that Denver defense is better on paper than it is in real life. I think they might hold Kansas City back a little bit early, but things are going to for sure open up for Kansas City. And then Denver is going to be playing from behind and be forced to throw the ball, which is not good for them. So Teddy Bridgewater might be a volume play here at quarterback, but I don't think he's going to be highly efficient. Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. This is a nice duo. They have a good ground game. They're going to try to keep things balanced as long as they can. I'd give Williams a slight bump here because he seems to be used a bit more in the pass game. And then your receivers for Denver, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Tim Patrick. I don't like any of these guys really this week. Hopefully they get back to using Cortland Sutton like a true wide receiver one and Jerry Jeudy like a true slot guy. And Tim Patrick is a bit more of that X factor, but I would want to see it before I start it. So I would fade on all three of those fellas. And then at tight end, Noah Fant. I have some stock in him. He's really underperformed. I'm betting that he hit rock bottom last week with his 2 or 3 point fantasy performance. You're starting to see him share some time with Albert O at tight end, which I don't like. Very pesky. But I think the pass volume is there. Garbage time potential is there where Noah Fant might find the end zone. He's due. So if you have him and been riding him, I don't think, unless you have an amazing option here, I think you stay the course at least one more time to see if he hits while he's due. And then on the Kansas City side, Patrick Mahomes, obvious start. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, obvious starts. The running back situation here is a little bit murky. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is back, but you have Darrell Williams in the mix. I don't know how this is going to pan out. I don't want to start either one of these guys, to be honest. If you have CEH and drafting him early to be your running back too, I don't know what to tell you. You might have to fire him up anyway. Personally, I would try to trade him if your trade deadline hasn't hit. So that's that. All right, now we have the Monday night game, New England at Buffalo. This is probably the game I'm looking forward to the most. I think we're going to learn a lot about these two teams, right? Buffalo, that's been up and down all year. We've seen them lose some ugly games to some bad teams, and then we've seen them blow out the Saints and blow out some other good teams. So, who is Baltimore? Are they for real? What's the deal with Buffalo? And then New England, that's been red hot. Mac Jones playing well. This defense playing amazing. So I think this is a statement win for the Pats defense. Love Matthew Judon and the crew here. I think they're going to expose that Buffalo O-line and put a ton of pressure on Josh Allen all night. And then I think this Buffalo defense gets exposed. We saw Tre'Davious White go down with injury last week. I think Mac Jones and this Patriots running game just kind of owns the line of scrimmage and is able to matriculate the ball downfield and just kind of take ownership of this game. I do think it's going to be a great game, back and forth, fantasy points to go around, but I really like the Patriots to just take control of this game and impose their dominance and show that they're the top dog in this division and a real contender in the AFC. So On the New England side, we have Mac Jones. Could be a decent start. I think we start to see this Patriots offense start to open up a little bit. I think they try to be as conservative as they can in a big game like this on a national stage, but Mac Jones could be someone worth at least paying attention to. I don't know if he's worth throwing into your fantasy lineup quite yet, especially against a formidable foe in Buffalo. The running back situation, we have a gnarly three-headed beast here with Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, and Brandon Bolden as they're passing down back. I think this is an ugly committee that I want to stay away from. Damian Harris seemed like a clear-cut starter earlier in the year, but now with the emergence of Stevenson, I think this is just one ugly committee I don't want any part of. Whoever finds the end zone is going to be the one you want to start. Good luck predicting that. Been my take on New England running backs for the past several seasons, and so I would always advise you guys not to draft a New England running back. At the receiver spot, Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers. I think these are a bit more PPR plays. Kendrick Bourne probably has a slight edge. We saw him with a nice play last week, and I predicted him as a sleeper for last week as well. But I don't know if either of these guys are worth starting this week. And then at tight end for the Patriots, we have Hunter Henry. I don't think this is a great matchup for him either. I think you have better tight end options out there this week as well. For Buffalo, Josh Allen is going to be a must start. I think he's a volume play here. I think you fire him up. You drafted him early to be your quarterback one. You got to stick with him. I think he does pretty good production, even though he's going to have a tough night. Buffalo also has a weird running back committee and don't run the ball that much. So you have Devin Singletary, Matt Breida coming onto the scene, and Zach Moss, who was, I believe, a healthy scratch last week, might get back into the mix. I would fade all the three of these guys as well. At receiver, you have Stephon Diggs. He's going to be a must start for you here, and an elite start. I think he's going to do fairly well this game, again, just out of volume. You have Emmanuel Sanders, who's been a decent streamer earlier in the year, has struggled of late. I don't know if he gets back to form. I want to see something before I start him. So I would fade Sanders. And Cole Beasley, I think going into the season, I liked him a bit more as a PPR option, but he hasn't lived up to the expectations or anything like that. So I would fade him as well. And then we have Dawson Knox at the tight end spot for Buffalo, who I think is startable. I think this is a guy you probably got off waivers for cheap. And you guys know I'm a big Dawson Knox fan, so I think he's a decent average starter for you this week. If you don't have any other options, go ahead and fire him up. All right, so that about covers each game this week. So just some housekeeping items before I go. Please give me a follow on Instagram at NFL.flex. Check out the website, NFLFantasyFlex.com. Please give me a subscribe if you enjoy listening to my ramblings here. Wish you all the best of luck on week 13, and keep an eye out on Instagram for my starts and sits list. And then keep an eye out early next week for my week 13 recap podcast. So thanks again for listening, everybody, and enjoy your weekend and take care.